Hey y'all. So there's some things I need to get off my chest. Cause this world is going crazy. And honestly, if I don't laugh about it, I might break down. I don't know. But there's a couple things. So first and foremost, systemic racism is what's being addressed. At least that's what's portrayed, and that's the word that's used. And that's why I gave the definition for systemic yesterday. But I'm going to put it a little bit more into perspective. I'm wondering if anybody actually pays attention to this, right? So I was out in Montgomery and I saw the Rosa Parks statue and I saw the bus stop. I saw her museum. I am a raging history buff. So it's a very big deal to me to be in a place of great historic significance, as well as to be able to explore and really try to put myself in the shoes of somebody who has experienced certain things. And with racism being the hugest issue, I guess, that we have right now, I thought, what a better way than to not only go explore and experience that side of things from Montgomery, but also Martin Luther King grew up in that area. You see the home that he lived in. You see the church where he was a pastor. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And growing up in a foster home with Eva Mae and Henry Sexton, a very politically prominent Black couple who really created a movement in Utah and really established the first Black American Civic Center. They were the first business owners in the state of Utah that were Black. Eva Mae was the first Black student to graduate with the extensive degree that she had in psychology from the University of Utah at a time when there was systemic racism, right? I wanted to connect somebody that I knew with historically just improper racial discrimination that existed. There's a reason that she was awarded the Rosa Parks Award and given other awards by the NAACP. Eva Mae was an amazing woman. When I talk about being business owners, her and Henry actually owned a gas station here in Utah. And when I say at a point in time where systemic racism was fairly prevalent, one of the reasons they own that business is because for her to use her degree and to have a job with that degree was impossible. Systemic racism existed and she could not find employment. Now this business that they own, this gas station, right, was a full service gas station, and Henry was running the pumps, the gas pumps, and went to go fill the car of a bunch of high school aged white men. And what ended up happening is they took the fuel nozzle from him and they turned the gas onto him and lit him on fire. Henry experienced burns on 70% of his body, to include internal burning and losing the use of one of his lungs and a majority of the other one. Pretty much the entire time I knew Henry while he was still alive, he was on oxygen. And Henry committed suicide in 2004, and it was a great loss. Eva Mae found a way to forgive him and still loved him for the rest of her years. She passed away about a decade later. But these two suffered through an enormous amount of racial hatred and discrimination for people who didn't know who they were, just the color of their skin. And Eva Mae talked about her grandfather back in Kansas, because that's where she grew up. She grew up in Lawrence, Kansas, and about his experience as a slave. She said, that's the closest tie I have. I was never a slave. I suffered through my own inequalities, but that's what I experienced. And again, one of the many reasons I'm into really understanding, appreciating, and knowing history was because if we don't have those lessons, if we don't try to find a way to empathize or sympathize with the mistakes that have been made in the past, then we'll make them again. We will. And so I endeavor to really truly understand that. Now, systemic racial discrimination exists when you have different drinking fountains, different places to ride on a bus. We have different discrimination as far as even gender and what you can do in the military, as well as, let me make sure that we got the Wi-Fi on. But there's a lot of things that you can't do based on many things, right? Like, we now have females going through different types of courses and stuff in the military to be more tactically inclined, to be able to do more tactically, to be able to be on more stringent types of teams that do different sort of engagement. Now, am I for different genders integrating in the military into like special operations and ranger units and things of this nature? Absolutely not. Does that make me a sexist? I don't know, I guess that's up for y'all to decide. What I have experienced personally is that working with, say, a FET, a female engagement team, or an integrated both gender types of tactical teams, is that there are always going to be issues. Nobody's going to be perfect. So you're going to have people who develop a romantic relationship, which can also happen with a same gender team, right? But it's actually a lot less prevalent. And you're going to have, as a result of those romantic inclinations, people who become more protective of other team members rather than everybody as a whole. And until we get to a point where we're mature enough socially as Americans to completely integrate and look at every team member as an equally participating member of the team, and not necessarily someone that someone is romantically inclined toward or sexually attracted to or whatever, that those things aren't going to continue. So that is systemic segregation. But that's, again, that was based on policy, based on biological and physiological necessity and what the human body dictates as our capabilities. Okay? When it comes to brute force, men have and maintain a different capacity than, say, women do, right? Our bodies are made specifically for procreation. And so we're going to have far more core strength. We're going to be able to endure a lot more pain. We're going to be able to carry on through certain things that men won't be able to. Men will have far more brute strength, have far more capabilities as far as musculature and extreme physical endurance to last through harsher climates and things like that. I'm not saying one is better or worse. I'm just saying that they're different. Okay? Now, that was why there was gender discrimination as far as policies are concerned. Policies being what makes systemic segregation the segregation that it is. If we're going to accuse this country of being racially discriminate on a systemic level, that means that you've got to see things like racial segregation in like drinking fountains, in public transportation, in areas of a restaurant, in employment practices. The only sort of systemic racism that exists today that I'm aware of, that's affirmative action. In colleges, in employment, things of that nature, trying to make sure that we are racially diverse, as opposed to hiring people based on the merit of their achievement, the extent of their education, as well as, I don't know, the content of their character. Does that phrase sound familiar? He was one of, if not the world's biggest advocate for peaceful protesting. Peaceful. Again, see these words, they mean stuff. So racism means something, but systemic racism means something specific. Right? Protesting means something, but peaceful protesting means something specific. So not rioting, not looting, not attacking other people, not demanding reparations. I'm telling you this right now, as the proud child of an immigrant. That whole line of my family was never here to enslave anybody. Was there slavery in South America? You bet your butt. Was it from similar parts of Africa? Absolutely. Now, did they go out seeking these slaves? No, they were actually sold by other tribe leaders from neighboring tribes in Africa. So again, still not my ancestors going out and kidnapping, which, by the way, exists today in Africa. Human trafficking and slavery is huge. That's not even considering the slave and human trafficking that exists worldwide, like the Uyghur community in China, which, with everybody's support of China, like the NBA, is amazing, because we can talk about slavery and how horrible it is, and have names on jerseys replaced with phrases and all sorts of things, kneeling before a national anthem that no longer promotes slavery, while the endorsement of the NBA, the shoes that these players make and sell and are on the advertisements for, as well as even the training camps that have physical abuse of children, are all Chinese related and definitely not spoken out against. In fact, the last person I recall, I think a year ago, who made a statement about free Hong Kong, lost out a lot of money. And I don't mean like a couple thousand or a few million. I mean endorsements and ties to China, and completely being boycotted by China as a result of this political statement. So if we believe in free speech, doesn't mean that everybody has to agree with us. But it does mean we have the right to say what we want without, fear of ramification or retribution on whatever it is that we believe. Right? Just like my Facebook page. This is my Facebook page. If you don't like it, if you're offended by it, if what I say just ticks you off to the core, keep scrolling. You don't need to be on my page at all. You don't have to agree with what I believe whatsoever. Okay? I'm not saying that you're a bad person. I'm saying what I think and what I believe and what I feel. And if you think that it's your right to get so ticked off and angry about what I think and I believe and I feel, then we're on two separate levels. One of our levels is completely intolerant. And it's not mine, because I'm not trying to stop you from talking. Whether or not I choose to listen, that's on me. Okay? But the second you start screaming about how you're not going to listen to a racist, or how someone's a bigot and they don't deserve a platform to use their First Amendment right, or how certain people should be part of this cancel culture and removed from any sort of like societal attention because you disagree with what they say, guess what? That makes you the segregating participant. That makes you the one who's the bigot. That makes you the one who's being discriminatory against somebody else. I swore an oath. At no point since I took that oath have I disavowed it. Have I said, okay, now that part of my life is done. I swore and I promised to uphold the Constitution. I promised to protect the freedoms and rights of every American with and up to my life. I'm not taking away anybody else's right, but you be damn sure to recognize that when somebody else's speech disregards another person, that's exactly what they're trying to do. It's absolutely astounding to me that nobody is really truly paying attention. Let's look at all these shootings that we're calling systemic racism. You want to know why it's happening at all? And it could happen to any race. But if the cops tell you something, and they tell you something at gunpoint, like, hey, put your hands up. Hey, don't move. Hey, don't go anywhere. And then you do it, especially if they've got a weapon pointed at you, especially if their safety is on the line. I mean, whose fault really is that? If you are out of control, if you're disobeying direct orders by people who are trying to maintain or keep peace, whose fault is that? Now, I don't see any policy, especially one for law enforcement, that says, hey, you need to racially discriminate against these people. I haven't seen one. That would be systemic racism. Haven't seen it yet. In fact, the response that I've been seeing from leadership is incredibly racist. But again, not systemic. That's a personal policy or belief or, ideological form of gaining money and support from certain people with certain agendas that I still can't say is systemic. If you automatically put officers on unpaid leave and pull them from the line of duty, and especially when your first statement is, we don't have all the facts in yet, and then you pull them, and then your last statement is, but we'll punish them to the fullest extent of the law, that tells me you've already made up your mind. You've made up your mind without all the information or the facts, and you are serving another master, definitely not your constituents, because all of your constituents include the employed citizens that wear a badge. How incredibly ironic. Incredibly ironic. Now, some of the things that have been brought up to me as far as examples of systemic racism, right, are failing inner city education systems, right? Local school districts and Board of Education in certain school districts, as well as, well, we'll start with that one. We're not going to go any further, okay? When it comes to education, there were specific policies. I forget if it's like redlining or blue lining or whatever. It was pointed out really well in areas surrounding Detroit, as well as Chicago. It really first came to light when Michael Moore did that documentary on Flint, Michigan, and the economic failure that happened when we outsourced all our jobs as far as the automotive industry, okay? Those practices, once they came to light, and we live in a country so free that we can create and film and put out these documentaries, as well as doing stories and everything that allows people to see the reality of the situation. So free is this country that we can shed light on these issues, okay? Now, if you're paying attention to China, they won't even shed light on the natural disasters happening, the poor quality of any of the dams that have been built and are failing after the fifth flood in a row, not to mention the typhoons, the earthquakes, the hailstorms. And what happens as a result of that? Oh yeah, crop shortages. So much like the 50s, where they are now about to hit a famine that previously killed tens of millions of people, they can't address any of it. There's a whole false narrative. That's what not being free is like. That's what this socialistic, Marxist sort of ideology gets you. We live in a country so freaking free that if you disagree with something, you can do so publicly. You can be as vociferous as you would like with all of the, citations to back up everything that you're saying and show other people exactly where you think there's a disparity. That's one of the joys of being American. You have that right. Now, again, if you're going to say systemic racism, those policies for how to segregate off certain communities so that you can isolate different districts for school and education and have more funding for this one versus more funding for that one. You want to talk about how those byproducts of these housing and real estate policies have turned out. Well, number one, that's not the current administration's fault. But number two, I want you to think about this, okay? It's based on the income of the people in the area and their taxes, which go to fund school districts and the education system. So when you have, say, like a mass exodus, like you do in New York City, I'm pretty sure we've all heard Cuomo talking about how he wants the residents to come back, and how people who have, other homes in various parts, they're, Martha's Vineyard or the Hamptons or whatever, and how they're considering staying there, especially because when it comes to income tax, they pay less. And so he's saying, come back. You need to come back. I'll cook for you. Come to my home. I'll cook. I'll take you out. I'll buy you a drink. Why is he saying this? Because the money is what he's concerned about. He's not concerned about the constituents or their well-being or their, fiscal responsibility to safeguard themselves against things like quarantines and complete and utter economic shutdowns. He's saying, come back because we need your money. I don't care about you, but we need your money. So if you have a Democratic representative who's that unconcerned about the people who put him in office, but more concerned about their money, that's kind of how you have these byproducts of racial discrimination still coming into effect and still playing out today, right? When you have people who don't care, that's what you see. Now, let's just go in opposition of that to see somebody who promotes school of choice, having the opportunity to go to a different school or get, funding from the government so that the money that's spent for each child to be educated in the United States doesn't get funded to a school that's doing nothing with the funding or isn't properly teaching these children, and they can go to another school, be it public or private or whatever the case may be, charter school, whatever. That's actually not liberal. That's not democratic. That's the current president. POTUS is a huge proponent of school of choice. He's actually fighting people to maintain that we have the school of choice so that our children have the opportunity to have better education in areas and school districts that have more funding, right? So again, systemic racism isn't necessarily applicable here. Then we go into medical, right? Hospitalization, medical insurance, treatment and care for different racial backgrounds, right? So I want you to think about this. When we were learning that washing your hands was a big deal, and I don't mean for coronavirus, I mean like 100 years ago in hospitals, when we were like, hey, bacteria and things like that are what's causing the high mortality rate of postpartum mothers, because at the time, doctors who were dealing with live births were also dealing with very sickly individuals or dead corpses, and they weren't washing their hands. Okay? So we were dumb, and then we learned better. But even yet and still, we had racial disparity. So when we're doing medical trials, when we're experimenting and trying to see things that improve, things that are disinfectants, things that are antibacterial, things and procedures that help with whatever, the trials were being done primarily with regard to Caucasians, which was a huge majority of the people who had made medical and technological advancements as far as this whole concept is concerned in Europe. So to maintain the studies that they were doing during a time of racial inequality, historically, what we know is based on the way a Caucasian would respond to certain things. Now, are we doing drug and medical trials differently now? Absolutely. But do we have the historical background with which to compare and say, okay, these adjustments need to be made? No, we don't. In fact, when Charles Murray and his co-author put out the bell curve, the statistical study on the differences of ethnicity and heritage, he was criticized, chastised, and protested away from even having a chance to speak about what they had found in over a fifth of a century of studies and statistical analysis. So either there's an issue and we're going to fix it, or there's an issue and the way of fixing it makes people feel like there's racial inequality and it shouldn't be heard. It's one or the other. You can't pick both. But again, systemic, no. Historic, Yes, there is historical racism in the medical field, and that is a result of our history. Our history reflects the mistakes as well as the successes that we've had over the years. So if you don't see these, then it's no wonder you want to argue with everybody because you're uninformed. Flat out. Now, when it comes to problems in the home and a higher percentage of Black Americans growing up in fatherless homes, government funding, again, which is taxpayer funding, remember that, like welfare, as well as other programs that are more or less for the elderly, but all of these things have very specific requirements. Do they require you to be drug tested to make sure that as a single parent you have enough sobriety that you're not putting your children in harm's way? No, they don't have that. But they do have a mandatory, you must be unmarried. So if you and your partner have a child and you're married and you come on hard times, like with quarantine or whatever, you do not qualify for welfare. That government cheese isn't yours. But if you're dating and have children out of wedlock, you absolutely do. So what does that do? That tells one of the partners that they do not have to remain in the household. There are no, legal or permanent requirements that say that they are responsible for that family. And so what happens? When things get rough, they can go. Literally, government funding absolutely promotes fatherless households. And so when you have a single income household like that, you then can't move out of inner city, which puts you in crappy school districts, which, by the way, the defining line in the segregation in some of those, Joe Biden was a huge proponent of. And you can even quote me on this. This is what he said during one of his other 2 out of 3 runs for president. He said, I don't want my children growing up in a jungle, a racial jungle. He was about educational segregation. He did not want his children growing up with Black kids. Funny fact, Hillary Clinton, also speaker at the DNC, was a huge proponent of Goldwater during his presidential election. And what was one of his platforms? He was running on resegregating America, having racial disparity and inequality emphasized and reinvigorated. So this party that anybody might be thinking is this huge proponent of Black America has been all about keeping America down, keeping America unwed in single parent households, keeping America uneducated, Black America uneducated and in poor schools so that their lack of education doesn't allow them to gain enough wealth or income to move out of the inner cities, and was also about systemically implementing policies that are racially discriminant. Not to mention that the founders of the KKK, as well as Planned Parenthood, were both registered Democrats. So this super liberal party is literally inciting and trying to find a way to reinstitute systemic racism. Now, if Black lives really freaking matter, why aren't we concerned about all of them? Like David Dorn, the Black retired police officer who tried to protect his friend's pawn shop during the riots in Minnesota. How about the 8-year-old girl whose parents made a wrong turn in Atlanta, and so making their U-turn to leave this CHOP wannabe area in Atlanta, shot up and killed an 8-year-old girl as a passenger in a vehicle? How about the dozens of shootings and killings of Black Americans, mostly at the hands of other Black Americans in Chicago, every single weekend? Every weekend. How come nobody's ticked or pissed off that anybody who gets shot by a cop wasn't listening? I counted even just the local situations where we're saying that we have illegal and unlawful shootings out here I've watched the videos. I've counted. It takes more than all my fingers to count how many times they say, stop, put the gun down, put your hands up, don't pick the gun back up that you just dropped. Literally, more than a dozen times they say this. He drops the gun twice. This is one of the local cases out here in Utah. And still tries to fire. This isn't to mention the other place near Atlanta, which is where that chop zone was set up, where the 8-year-old was killed, where the guy was passed out drunk in the Wendy's and had a 45-minute conversation with the police officers who were incredibly cordial, and then tried to fight them twice, stole a taser, and then turned around and fired it off. If somebody can show me where there's actual systemic racism, I'd love to know. But the end of all of this is this, and this is a very simple concept. Okay? Anybody who watched the DNC, if you can stomach it, 10 points for you. Because I couldn't sit through an entire speech. It was so nauseatingly vomitous. I couldn't do it. And I've seen some horrible things in my life. That one, I just couldn't do. But if you manage to do so, and you heard Joe Biden talk about how he's going to fix the country by bringing people in who are part of the light, I couldn't believe the testicular fortitude it must have taken to say some stupid crap like that. When you know good and goddamn well you're the reason for the racial inequality with regards to education, housing practices, as well as with law enforcement, with criminal justice as a whole. Tell me how that's light. The entire demeanor of the entire DNC for that whole week was negative, was pessimistic, was aggressively attacking the current executive office, and yet didn't have a single friggin' platform. Oh, so hard not to cuss. I get so upset. Had no platform to stand on. Not a single one. And his last 2 tries at running for the president were pretty much thrown out the window because of all of the falsehoods that came out of his mouth. Much like his running mate, who is also a cop and was pretty excessive in the force that she used in charging more than 1,500 small marijuana drug offenses in the state of California. Now again, let's put that in comparison with just last night's RNC first night convention. I've never seen more patriotic, optimistic, positive, heart-wrenching, actual platforms with cited evidence and proof of someone maintaining, keeping their word, and having the American dream as well as all the American people in mind at every point during the last 4 years, while being under investigation, while being severely criticized, while being critiqued and chastised for every single thing that he's done. We go back and we flip back and forth and we look at all the things he said and we say, well, this isn't the same as this and this isn't the same as this. Well, 1, he's told you he's not a doctor. Well, 2, he's tried to be transparent, which means that ideas and situations and policies evolve over time the more we have information. But nobody does that with anybody else. Nobody's talking about how he was called a xenophobe by Biden and by Pelosi while she was in the middle of Chinatown, not doing her job, telling everybody else that she represented not to show up to work either, talking about how there is no China virus. And then a week later, while her state's under quarantine, showing her $25,000 ice cream fridge and her constituents are unemployed, broke, and starving. But we're complaining that Trump's a racist. You're not going to agree with everything that any one person believes. But damn it if you can't open your eyes to see that one is actually an option and a choice, and the other is just letting us all masquerade again around with this marionette puppet that we're going to put in place with no idea what he's going to stand for, because the memes from 2004 and 2008 and 2012 have showed a continuously mentally disintegrating old curmudgeon like Joe Biden, who has no idea what's going on, who's more fond of smelling kids and having them touch his leg hairs than being aware of what year it is, what job he held, what historically has occurred, and what's actually his fault to begin with. So please, if somebody has some way to show me actual systemic racism, which is the only thing that they have to say against Orange Man at this point, that's a current policy, that's something that he hasn't already denounced like 11,000 times, show me that. Show me why anybody should vote for Biden. Show me how they know anything that he intends to do other than make sure everybody wears a mask, even by themselves, outside in a perfectly uncompromised area. Show me how the counting that we're doing with the CDC, according to their official websites, has any proper justification other than to shut our economy down. I'm not even getting like all conspiracy theorists on anybody. I legitimately welcome anybody who can inform me and educate me on how I'm wrong. Because these aren't just my ideas. Like, I've been continuously, for weeks on end, ad nauseum, criticized for my consistent and attentive focus on not only local situations, but national as well as global issues all over. Like, I talked about the weather phenomenon and natural disasters happening in China. Has anybody else been paying attention? Because the same thing's happening in Italy, in our sweet Verona. The hailstorm that has ice floods floating vehicles down the road because it's too strong, too swift, and too deep for any one person as a pedestrian to make it through. The world is falling apart. It's falling apart. Don't be so swayed by other people's ideas. Anything I've said, please, by all means, go research it. I post up videos. I show, other news articles or examples and clips of all of the information regarding what's happening. Don't take my word for it, right? Call me LeVar Burton. I'm trying to be Switzerland and I'm trying to be reading Rainbow up in here. The more you know, and I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible. But dang it, dude. It's pretty clear cut, and I can't see anything else. I can't. The complaints are going in one ear and out the other, and every single time I bring this up, like to the person who was in charge of the cinematography for Obama campaign ads that was in my paramotor class, who became a pilot with me, right? He said, give me an example. Show me where I'm wrong. Make me believe what you believe with whatever bigger picture you have. And they can't. I keep getting told it's not my place to educate you. I keep getting told, silly girl, you don't know anything. Or, everything is racist. Everything he's ever done is racist. He's never done anything for the country. Are you kidding? Are you freaking kidding? Like, it's amazing to me that nobody can cite any specific instance, especially with regards to the current administration, about racial systemic policy that needs to be changed. Everything I'm seeing with BLM, which clearly isn't following after its own namesake, hasn't supported any change. There's riots, there's looting, there's protesting, there's angry people, there's people who are seeking justice on lawful shootings. But show me where you're changing policy. Show me where your effort does a dang thing to improve what you're complaining about. Show me. But until you do, stop talking shit and getting in my face and using stupid ass rhetoric to explain why you don't have to explain what isn't in any way a valid point. Please. I love you all, even if you disagree with me. It's just my 2 cents.